Call the roll.
Chair Jim Holton.
Present.
Melanie Griffin.
Present.
Cliff Manuel.
Present.
Michael Miller.
Present.
Commissioner John Denton.
Present.
Commissioner Pat Kemp.
Here.
Commissioner Betsy Bonac.
Here.
Commissioner Catherine Starkey. Commissioner Starkey is out of the country, sends her regrets that she is unable to join us today. Commissioner Karen Seal.
Present.
Mayor Rick Kreisman.
Here.
Mayor Bob Buckhorn. Mayor Buckhorn is out of town and sends his regrets. He is unable to join us today. Kathleen Shanahan.
Here.
Commissioner Janet Long.
Here.
Secretary David Nguyen.
Here.
Secretary Elke Nandez. Here. Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Sue. Before we get started with public comment, I'd like to recognize our new commissioner, John Mitten from Hernando County. John, will you introduce yourself, please, and say a few things about yourself?
Thank you. It's a delight to be here. John Mitten, new commissioner appointed in Hernando County, and I was out of country in India when the governor called. And before I was able to come back, my commission divvied up the committees, and unfortunately, you are stuck with me for the foreseeable future. But it's a delight to be here and look forward to collaborating with each of you as we move TBARTA forward. Thank you.
Thanks so much for those comments. Sue, would you give the public service announcement, please?
Persons wishing to address the board are requested to complete a comment card and give it to staff. Public comment will be limited to 3 minutes. The public comment period can be extended for up to 30 minutes.
I have no public comment cards. Is there anyone wishing to make public comment? None being heard, I'll close public comment. The next item, Chair recognizes Whit Blanton for an update on the CCC.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, board members. Pleasure to be here. Whit Blanton with Ford Pinellas. I'd like to just give you a very brief overview of the Chair's Coordinating Committee meeting that we had on July 13th. It's the TBARTA Chair's Coordinating Committee, and it was at the Hillsborough Community College in Plant City. And there were a number of items that we approved based on public notice. We approved a 2019 Regional Multi-Use Trails Priority Project. We approved the 2019 West Central Florida Regional Roadway Network. These are projects that are in the pipeline or we need to have funding created for regional transportation. And then the third item that we approved was the 2019 Transportation Regional Incentive Program Priority Projects. And these are a collection of projects that are a 50-50 match between local funds and state funds to improve mobility throughout the region. And there are a lot of great tie-in projects on that list. Our next TBARTA CCC meeting will be December 14th, and at that meeting, the action item will be to approve the major regional transportation priority projects. Following that meeting, we had a joint meeting for the I-4 super region with our partners in the Orlando metro area and beyond, and it was really the I-4 super region. They have an MPO alliance serving the MPOs for Volusia, Brevard, Orlando area, and Lake County as well. And part of that meeting, we had presentations from Rick Homans of the Tampa Bay Partnership, Tim Giuliani of the Orlando Economic Partnership. We had a presentation from Hyperloop Technologies. I think many of you may have seen that presentation as well. And the discussion was really how do we better connect our super region for economic prosperity for everyone. And the joint boards adopted a resolution that's been signed by the two chairs, Winter Haven Mayor Nathaniel Birdsong and Seminole County Commissioner Lee Constantine, regarding supporting the preservation of the rail corridor in the rail envelope in the I-4 corridor to improve regional mobility as well. And that joint resolution has been collaboratively worked on between these partners for several months prior to that meeting. So we're really excited about this newfound partnership, and really I think there's going to be a lot of follow-on from that. Following that meeting, Commissioner Delary of Seminole County reached out to me, and we are having a meeting with Pinellas County Chair Ken Welch to talk about further conversations about how we unite our super region in continuing efforts. So it's really good to get together face-to-face and talk about these issues and continue to advance regional transportation priority projects. So that's the Chair's Coordinating Committee report for this period. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to try and answer them.
Any questions for Whit? None being heard. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Next item of business is ratification of the June 22nd, 2008 emergency board meeting. All those items are listed in your packet. Our typical process is not to readdress those individually, but to have one motion unless one board member or any board members wants to pull one item specifically and have a refreshed memory or discuss any item that was previously approved. Yes.
I'd like to move the consent agenda.
Second.
Been a motion and a second for the consent agenda. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? The ayes have it. Part B of the consent agenda is the minutes from the prior meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes?
Move approval.
Second.
There's been a motion and a second. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. All opposed? The ayes have it. Minutes approved. We now turn to item 6, the chairman's report. First, I'd like to congratulate everyone on moving very quickly and forward with the selection of the ad hoc committee. We've done that. We've been in constant contact with a recruiter, and that's moving along. And I think you've been provided in your packets the tentative date schedule, but I am going to go over that briefly if anyone has any questions. So the committee will have a meeting on August 10th at 11 a.m., which is a preliminary meeting to discuss logistics, schedule, process, and salary range. We discussed that a little bit in the Finance Committee today, but we will probably be doing that again and discuss that general kind of procedures and salary at that time. On August 17th, the application window closes for selections for sending in a resume. On August 28th at 2 p.m., we'll have the initial review with Greg from Krauthammer to recommend approximately 8 to 10 candidates. It could be more or less depending on the caliber of the candidates he reviews and so forth, but we have interim reports that they're getting in a good volume of candidates, and there should be a nice selection for us all. On September 14th at 10 a.m., it's not 2, right? It's 10 a.m.
It's 10 a.m.
10 a.m., the top 5 to 7 candidates will be interviewed by the full ad hoc committee. We won't do round robins because there are some technical issues with the sunshine law, and after reviewing case law on a round robin type of thing, we determined it was best to have the full ad hoc committee do those interviewings in a publicly noticed meeting in the complete sunshine. So we'll do that, and then we will make selection of 2 to 3 to bring to the full board for interviews on September 21st at 9:30 a.m., at which time hopefully we can make a recommendation for selection. So this process has been accelerated. It has tried to accommodate everyone's needs, and hopefully we can get this done in a very timely and efficacious practice here. I made a recommendation that our legal counsel attend all the ad hoc committee meetings for obvious purposes, so we do everything correctly and by the book. Any questions for me or staff or counsel regarding the process? Commissioner Long.
Yes, Mr. Chair, did I hear that we were not going to have an opportunity to have one-on-one meetings with the 2 or 3 top selected folks? Is that what you said?
Yeah, we would originally considered the round robin meetings, but I thought it'd probably be best in consultation with counsel, with Michael, and with the recruiter that we conduct those in probably this venue here, and everyone have a chance to question directly in complete sunshine, you know, with public participation, the questioning and interview of the individual members, of the candidates.
And will we have an opportunity to ask our own questions, or is each one of us asking the same?
No, absolutely not. You will have the opportunity to answer your own questions, ask your own questions.
Thank you.
And again, one of the impetus for doing this was there have been cases in, I don't know if it's been decided on a district court level, but on circuit court levels where you have this kind of an individual interview and then a rating system and hand those up for tabulation. Those have been challenged for sunshine law violations. And we wanted to have the complete appearance of propriety in doing this and not have any possibility of a legal challenge. And I think certainly inviting the public in an open forum to hear the questions we ask is very responsive to the community and probably the best way to get that done. Other questions? Yeah.
Did you say there's a whole schedule or in our packets?
There should be in your packets a schedule, yeah.
There was a schedule provided in the previous packet, but we will send out the updated, abbreviated schedule that's a bit more concise than what the recruiting firm had provided. So,
Which is not in here.
which is not actually in the packet at this time.
Yeah, that's essentially what I read from today, and so that'll be sent out to you by email.
Yes.
Copies of that today. So we look forward to that process continuing. The next item to report is the legal services agreement, and I'm going to recognize Cameron Clark to go over the new legal services agreement with Bryant Miller Olive.
Thank you. Thank you, board
Yeah.
members.
This is before you, and you'll see underneath your packets with a paperclip is actually, it's the same that's in your revised packet. I just, for clarity, added for the exhibits, headers and page numbers to what you already have. This is a legal services agreement that was worked on, negotiated between my office and between Bryant Miller Olive, Alan Zimmett, and I have worked on this together. BMO is agreeable. The terms and conditions in the agreement states things like, obviously, hourly costs. It creates options for the board to utilize BMO for other specialized services should those needs arise. It is legally sufficient for your approval, and if you have any questions, Alan and I here can take them.
Any questions for Mayor?
A couple questions. Under the term of the agreement, there is no end date. It looks like it just continues on, and I'm not sure that's necessarily a good thing.
You could impose a term of years if you wish, but the termination is that either party can terminate at any time for any reason.
Yeah, the at-will termination is probably more flexible than anything else to allow us to, if any of us had a change of heart or an issue, we could terminate.
And the only reason I mention that is I know just from my experience with the city, every so often I think it's a good thing to do an RFP so that you're making sure it's competitive, remains competitive, that you're getting the best rates, and so I think it's something we ought to consider.
Sure, and nothing that's in the agreement would preclude that. And for instance, the specialized counsel services like bond counsel, et cetera, it states at the board's option that the board can utilize BMO. However, the board can always go through an RFP process. Per statute, you're not required to for legal services, but for instance, I mean, I can tell you Hillsborough County is not required to either, but we usually do for those reasons that you stated. For what it's worth, the current agreement for legal services with Hillsborough County also is just terminable at will. It does not have a term of years, and I believe that Mr. Kahn's agreement beforehand was the same.
Yeah, and I think either the policy committee or the finance committee could have periodic review of those to make that suggestion. And so we have the broadest possible agreement with an at-will termination, I think, that gives us the best of all worlds would be mine.
Two other questions, if I may. Of course. Just for clarification, they're going to serve as bond counsel, disclosure counsel, really kind of general counsel covering all issues?
I'm sorry, Alan, did you want to? I was going to say that the agreement itself is for general counsel services. There are provisions in there in several of the attachments that address, should the need arise, the board can also utilize them for bond counsel, disclosure counsel, or P3 counsel. But the substance of the agreement is really talking primarily about general counsel services, and I'll let Alan add to that if he wishes.
No, I mean, Cameron addressed it. The bond counsel rates, we use the rates that were the result of the RFP that Hillsborough issued and awarded the bond counsel contract to BMO. So we offered those rates. If you want to use us as bond counsel, you have that ability, but it's at your option. And while I have the floor, if I could go back to your last question, I did include in the agreement, I added in a provision that the entire board would review the agreement and the compensation that we're paid every single year, once a year on our anniversary, so you would do that in August of every year. So I did recognize that. I do have two other or 3 other agreements where I'm general counsel type agreements, and they don't have an end date, but my feeling is, if you ever get unhappy with our services, all you have to do is let us know, hire a replacement, and, we'll leave on good terms. So that's the way I prefer to do it, and develop long-term relationships, and it's worked for me. So that's why I propose it that way.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chair recognizes Mike.
Are there any sort of perceived conflicts?
Mr. Chair, a point of order, please. You have an automated system here, so if you'd like to speak, it's important to hit your button, and then the chair sees that come up on his screen, and he will click you on when it's your turn to talk, and click you off when you're done. So just
Thank you for that
FYI.
reminder, Commissioner Long.
Thank you, Mayor.
And I'm challenged on that too, so I think we'll push that one.
It also turns on your microphone.
Yeah.
Right, which would also be helpful.
When he pushes the button, I'll come show you.
Okay.
The button is in push, is there another
All right, so I do this to get him, right?
Yeah, now, for some reason, you're not on.
I'm not on my
You're
screen.
not on. Okay, hold on. Brad. Oh, no, we got it, we got it. Okay, see how, oh, it doesn't have the right names
this
in
one-
there, but
this
if you know
one-
where they're sitting, you just look.
This one lets him on.
This one moves them up. Wait, that moves her up, okay, and this shuts them off,
Okay.
all right?
Are you not entertained?
No, you should be on.
Looks like a Christmas tree down there to me.
It's a little more difficult because the chair is not familiar with where all the PSTA board members are sitting, and so those names are coming up, that's what you'll see.
We'll figure it out.
Are there any inherent conflicts of interest between serving in these sort of 3 different capacities, bond counsel, disclosure counsel, and P3? And then I guess the second part of my question, are there any perceived potential conflicts of interest between serving TBARTA in any of those roles and your existing client relationships with local governments?
I'll take them in that order. There's no inherent conflict in being general counsel, P3, and bond counsel. We certainly do that for other governmental agencies in those 3 capacities, and have done projects, P3 projects, and also acted as bond counsel on projects and where we're also general counsel or city attorney. And I don't think there's not a problem there. So yes, and we talked with Chair Holden about it. There is potential because of our representation of many other local governments that there could be a situation where we could have a conflict of interest. Obviously, the Florida Bar rules address it. We try to address it in our contract. There's a provision, if you want to take a look at, I think it's paragraph, I put my glasses on, paragraph 5 of the agreement on page 2. If that situation arises, we're guided by the Florida Bar rules. We would refer the TBARTA to either other bond counsel or P3 counsel to handle that project. If it's a situation where we're legally able to and ethically able to get a waiver, and that's what the board wanted us to do, we would seek to get waivers from the other client. But otherwise, we'd refer you to somebody else. We certainly don't want to get in a position, I don't want to get in a position after all the years of practicing law to get in an ethical violation or get into a conflict situation where I could get into a problem. So we're definitely not going to do that. We've obviously been doing this quite a few years, and we recognize that we have an attorney who advises us on all ethical issues, and if there is an ethics problem, we'll address it. Occasionally that can happen, but just the mere fact that we represent, for example, Hillsborough County does not create a conflict. Does that answer your question?
Okay, thank you. Other questions? Betsy?
Yeah, I think this is a good move that we're moving into having you as our counsel. I just want to make sure that we are budgeting appropriately, since this is an increase in what we've paid for legal services. So I know that PSTA has been assisting us in putting together our budget. I'm going to talk about it a little bit when I get to the finance report, but just want to make sure that we have a budgeted amount and that is known what so that we don't exceed our budgeted amount on an annual basis. And I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that, if you want to come forward, PSTA, or Michael, if you can respond to that.
Sure. So, we've been paying a significantly discounted rate at Hillsborough County, the amount of $75 per hour. The amount that we've negotiated with BMO is consistent with the public sector amount of $250 an hour, which is also consistent with what we paid our previous legal counsel, Pennington. As far as this year's budget, there is enough to cover the remainder of the year with the increase between $75 and $250 per hour. But, and I can defer to Debbie as well for the next fiscal year for us preparing for an increase in legal services fees from the previous year.
Cameron?
And I'm sorry, just for the record, minor clarification, the rate for Hillsborough County is $118.57 per hour. There apparently is a scientific reason as to why it comes out with change on it. I don't understand what it is, but.
All right, good morning. I'm Debbie Leas, the Chief Financial Officer here at PSTA. In the budget for next year, I have allocated an amount into the budget. A portion of it will be able to be paid for with the $1 million from FDOT, so long as the work that BMO is doing is specifically project-related. Everything else will have to come out of your local funds. So we don't want to have any grants paying for anything that is not project-specific. So we do have that built into the budget for next year.
Commissioner Long?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And I think I know the answer to this, but just for clarification, since we're being streamed today, are we paying for 2 attorneys or 1 going forward?
Going forward, the expectation was that TBARTA would provide Hillsborough County with a 30 days notice that is provided in the agreement to terminate that agreement, and that you would only have 1 attorney going forward.
May I follow up, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Well, I guess I like the fact that we have retained or are about to retain you. Mr. Zimmett, I certainly know your worth from working with you on several other boards. I don't like the optics of having 2 attorneys for TBARTA, given the way we are trying to work so hard to get our finances in order. And may I recommend that we take action along with this to ensure that Mr. Clark has certainty, and so does Mr. Zimmett, that we're not doubling up on our attorneys?
Well, that was the plan, then Mr. Clark would tender his resignation today, and Mr. Zimmett would take his place.
Just wanted clarification, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Can I just address that? I know Cameron probably will, but under the agreement, so one of the boards has to take action, either this board or the Hillsborough County Board of County Commissioners. So when Mr. Clark and I discussed it, we thought it would just seem to make sense, as Commissioner Long suggested, that this board take a motion to actually authorize Michael to send the letter to Hillsborough County to terminate the agreement. And then, even though technically Mr. Clark will be under contract for the next 30 days, if the board doesn't assign him any work, there won't be 2 attorneys working for TBARTA going forward. So that was the way we kind of had worked it out between us and Michael.
I appreciate that very much. And I have one question for Ms. Leos, if you wouldn't mind. And it just went right out of my head. Oh, it came right back again. All I have to do, thank you. I hate when that happens. Could you please tell the board where we are in terms of paying Mr. Clark? Because I understand that is one of the outstanding items that we have not paid.
That is correct. We have, I think, it's around $9,300 that we haven't paid. We should have that paid within the next probably, I'm going to say 2 weeks.
Excellent. Thank you.
Sooner? There
Well,
you
look at
go.
that. We're going to get you
so
paid.
much,
Isn't that a great thing?
News to your ears.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes, Melanie?
Just a few. In terms of paying you both and then the issue of having two attorneys, is all of the transition work for which you would both bill in terms of anything that you need to know about work that Cameron's completed, has that all been transitioned, the files, to BMO?
I think pretty much Cameron has been really good about just copying me or sending me documents like the bylaws and the employee manual and things like that. So I think, as far as I know, we've been coordinating very well. I think I have everything that I need. But certainly if there's anything else, you know, Cameron and I have been communicating very well, and that'll go.
And to be clear, what'll happen is after the vote today, after today's meeting, there won't be any more bills coming from Hillsborough. And thereafter, I mean, if Alan has any question or anything, he can always call me, and that's gratis. I'm obviously not in charge for that sort of thing. So if anything comes up as far as transition, TBARTA is not going to be charged from it by me.
Regarding the three other entities for whom you perform services as general counsel, what entities are those?
City of Largo, City of Safety Harbor, and PSTA.
And all the conflict checks have been run with those three entities and any work that would be necessary for TBARTA?
Right.
And then just going back to the RFP question, I know this is a really niche area. Are you aware of how many other attorneys would have your similar skill set in this geographic territory? I'm assuming it's very few.
It depends how you define that skill set. So there are very few that have experience with special districts and transit systems. Probably the only other one would be David Smith at Gray Robinson. If you go outside and talk local governments, there's probably 3, maybe 4 folks in Pinellas County. That's probably stretching it. And there's really nobody else in Hillsborough.
You answered my question with the transit. I mean, I think that's obviously necessary. And so I just wanted to make sure, it sounds like, putting out an RFP for 2 people would be a little bit of an overkill. My next question regarding the $250 per hour for attorneys, I know we've addressed that that's what we previously paid our attorney, but what is standard, if either you or Mr. Clark knows, either in your other engagements and or for other similar boards?
Well, honestly, the rate at PSTA is lower for a couple of reasons. One, I've been at PSTA for since 1988. So it's a long-term engagement, and they have substantially more work than TBARTA has, so they do get a more of a discounted rate. My regular rate is $395 an hour, so this is still a discounted rate. This is the standard rate that I charge new local government clients. Actually, it's the low end of the rate that I charge new local government clients.
And then I understand this is higher than PSTA's, and obviously there's been a lot of inflation since '88, but do you know what's standard then for other boards, so we have a comparison to make sure that we're in line with that?
I mean, with us, the $250 is at the bottom of our standard rate for local government clients.
So that's what other local government clients are paying?
Us, yes.
Okay, that's what I want to make sure.
And just to finish the answer, so Largo and Safety Harbor are not on an hourly rate. They are on retainers. They pay us monthly retainers, so I can't, for the general counsel work.
Right, and I was more concerned about the optics of what other boards were paying, making sure that we're paying in line. So it sounds like that's the answer, is that other local governments, while there's a range, that this certainly is average, that TBARTA wouldn't be called out for paying a higher hourly rate than other boards.
No.
How much of the time for the attorneys will be your time versus an associate or someone with a lower skill set?
So probably 80 to 90% is going to be me. The board meetings, I will have a partner of mine who has been doing this work for 8 years, is board certified. City, county, and local government will step in for me when I'm not available. And then, so I would say about 10% might be associates, 10 to 20%, and the rest will be partners.
Perfect. And then my last question is, this is regarding the 4th or 5th paragraph of section 4. regarding in any litigation matter in which the event and a person or entity other than TBARTA is required to pay our attorney's fees and costs. So as you know, TBARTA would be responsible, or at least I'm assuming, I'm making an assumption. I'm assuming that BMO isn't going to let TBARTA just have a clock on that we would traditionally, the client pays those fees until they're actually collected. And so then in that event, is that the way that's going to work? And then
No, let me tell you.
okay, I was a little concerned about that paragraph.
So the genesis of this is a Supreme Court case a couple years ago relating to prevailing party attorney's fee clauses when the government is one of the parties. And the Supreme Court said that the actual contracted rate is not the limit of the rate that will be charged if the government wins the case and is awarded attorney's fees. And I may not be, I know you're an attorney, so you understand what I'm talking about. But for those of you that don't, I can explain it further. So what this clause says is, if for example, TBARTA has a prevailing party clause in an agreement with a vendor, and that says that we get attorney's fees if we win. If we then get into litigation with that vendor and we win, they pay the $3.95 an hour, my regular rate. TBARTA would never pay $3.95 an hour. Does that make sense?
It absolutely does, now that you've explained it. And my question is, just knowing how this practically works, I don't think that's clear from the paragraph. And so I would just ask then our current general counsel, is the recording of his, I mean, obviously trust him, he's debated the representation of the attorney on the record. Is that sufficient then going forward? Or is there anything else that we need to do to amend this contract to make it clear that that the rate that TBARTA would pay during litigation is $2.50 per hour, but that then once we were able to collect from the third party, they would be charged $3.95 per hour to reimburse BMO? Does that make sense?
No, I think, I mean, I read that to mean exactly what Mr. Zimmett described,
Okay.
but if the board has any concerns and you have suggested changes, you know, you can, of course, present those. But when I read that, that's what it means to me, what the same thing what Mr. Zimmett just described, which is essentially that in that limited circumstance with an award of attorney fees, this clause applies.
I think in the record today clarifies that too.
Okay, I don't have any other questions.
Thanks. Any other questions? Commissioner Kim.
Thank you. I just have a single question. I understand that you've been working with PSTA since, I think you said 1988, and you get quite a bit of work from there. But what is your hourly fee there?
I figured somebody might ask that. Debbie, do you remember what we have the reason I'm going to struggle a little bit is we have an agreement, the amount escalates every year, and honestly, I just don't keep track of it. It's in the, somewhere around 220 or 230. And it'll go up October 1st. I want to say, I thought I looked at that, and I thought on October 1st it goes to 235.
Thank you. And right now we have 118 per hour? Okay.
Thank you.
Still?
So you mentioned that you're paid a monthly retainer for Largo and Safety Harbor. What are those amounts?
So we have 2 retainers now at Largo. They are roughly total, so one retainer that I'm paid for city attorney is about $11,000 a month. Safety Harbor, it's about $7,000 a month.
About 1,000?
7,000.
7,000 a month, okay. Do we have any idea what our estimated monthly TBARTA costs will be since we're paying hourly?
I think as we move forward, we can get a better feel for that, but as a new agency that's kind of transitioning, I don't know that we have that number specifically yet, but it will be developed.
Yes, that's correct.
How many hours have you been spending, Cameron?
I mean, I can tell you that, and I actually asked that question to Mr. Shermanzi when I first came in, and what I did was I just used Don Kahn's old billing statements, and what it comes down to is it fluctuates almost month to month. It just depends on how much work's coming in and how much work you're doing on any particular TBARTA project. There's been months where honestly the only thing I bill for is the meeting because there's no other legal work that's coming in. But then especially like around the transition when the statute was amended and we had to do all this transitional work, it was much larger. So it's hard to nail down, and I don't know my exact average of hours, but it fluctuates greatly depending on how much legal work TBARTA needs.
I'd like us to just pay attention to that because it may be better that we go to a monthly retainer.
And that's something to consider. I think this is probably the best way to start out and then monitor that closely.
Yeah. Thank you.
But from my perspective, and I have to say, I wish I could have found an attorney of his caliber for $250. I could never find one anywhere. But anyway, that being said, any other questions? Yes, Mayor Harassman.
Exhibit C, expenses and billing. It notes that BMO is, they have to hire third parties to provide services on TBARTA's behalf. BMO will assume the responsibility for retaining the appropriate providers, but TBARTA is responsible for paying all fees and expenses directly related to those service providers. So a question and a comment. In the last sentence, it says, for administrative and coordination services, BMO may charge an administrative fee. Is that coordination and administrative fee or services, is that for going out and actually retaining those experts?
Mayor, can I just, I think that when Mr. Clark prepared the agreement that came from some other agreement, I would ask you to take that out. I don't intend to charge you to go hire an expert or some other expert that or person that you need for services that I can't provide. So I didn't intend to do that, but Mr. Clark, I think that came from some other agreement. I don't know if that came from Mr. Kahn's agreement. So I would ask, Mayor, that you make a motion to take that out of the agreement.
Okay. And then the only other comment related to that section is something for the board to consider is to kind of put a not to exceed without prior approval amount in. So if it reaches a certain amount that before the experts can be retained or the services provided, that at least we be consulted.
And that's acceptable as well.
Sure, and if that's the case, honestly, board members, if you look at Exhibit C, and I think you're talking about the second paragraph of number one, you can strike the second paragraph in its entirety as part of your motion. And also, and I actually had discussed this briefly with the chair, was the idea of, in terms of expenses, you could set a threshold where requires pre-authorization of the chair before any expenses are incurred beyond a certain amount. You could certainly add something like that if you wished.
I would like to make the motion to do what you just said.
Okay.
That we add that, we delete this second paragraph on Exhibit C, and that we add the language that he just spoke.
We'll have to establish a cap.
Yeah.
Establish the cap.
Cap amount. We need about.
Do you want to name?
Well, actually, it was a threshold. Did you say it wasn't a cap?
No, just a threshold. Yes, you said a threshold dollar amount. So if the expenses reach the threshold, it needs chair approval before it can be incurred.
Just a question on that. What is BMO? Most law firms are going to want in advance. I know we're a deemed need. I can't actually usually spend more on a transcript or whatever depot. We want to get it from the client first. So does BMO have something like $500 or whatever that typically you'd want to get that from the client first that we might want to consider as our threshold?
You mean for like for
before you order a transcript, before you order a $3,000 transcript, a lot of times law firms, they're going to pay for a couple phone calls or legal research, but they're not going to want attorneys to order, depot transcripts without getting the costs covered by the client first or bill them directly. Do you have any type of threshold like that that might be helpful for us in this guidance?
I have a hard and fast threshold. I try not to go over $500.
That's what I was thinking. I would suggest $500.
$500. I would amend my motion to make it at the $500 threshold limit.
Can I just make one suggestion? So just for ease sometimes, could we do, if we had a threshold of $500, that we'll talk to the executive director, and then if it's over, let's say $2,000, we'll go to the board chair? Just because a lot of times it's a lot easier to get to the executive director if we need to make a little bit quicker decision and get the authorization. I mean, I know the executive director has 50,000 in authority, so I was just make it a little bit more streamlined or.
Okay, I will
Not have
modify my motion to have the 500 be with the executive director and the 2,000 limit with the board chair.
And that way I don't have to bother Jim.
There's been a motion and a second. Any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. The amendment passes. Any other questions regarding the contract?
Move approval?
It's been a move to approval as amended.
Second.
Second, any further discussion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Approved. Alan, welcome aboard.
Very good.
Cameron, thank you very much for your service.
And board members, just for clarity, it might be worthwhile just to make sure it's clear to have a vote to terminate the agreement with Hillsborough County and to say delegate to the executive director the written notice.
I was going to suggest that, and I will entertain that secondary motion now.
I just would like to be able to vote no on that.
Oh, well, we were going to make that motion, and,
I know, but the one you just took, you only asked for approval.
oh, I thought I said aye and any nays. Okay, all right.
I
That being said, why don't we, Sue, call the roll, please?
Is there a motion?
Yeah, this is the motion to approve, to approve.
Melanie Griffin?
Yes.
Yes.
Cliff Manuel?
Yes.
Michael Miller?
Yes.
Commissioner John Mitten?
Yes.
Commissioner Pat Kemp?
No.
Commissioner Betsy Benak?
Yes.
Commissioner Karen Seal?
Yes.
Mayor Rick Kreisman?
Yes.
Kathleen Shanahan?
Yes.
Commissioner Janet Long?
Yes.
We have 10 yeses and 1 no.
Thank you, Sue. Motion passes. I will now entertain the secondary ancillary motion to terminate the contract with Hillsborough County.
I'd make that motion, and also thank you very much for your service.
Ditto.
I'll second it with that same thank you for your service. Appreciate it.
There's been a motion and a ditto second. Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Any opposed? The ayes have it.
I just want to say thank you, and I look forward to working with everybody.
Thank you.
I'd just like to add briefly as well that I've had the chance to work closely with Alan in a special counsel capacity thus far. I've been very impressed with their staff and their expertise in transit-related matters, and particularly with special districts. I'd also like to recognize Mr. Clark for his service and for stepping in a time of need when our previous legal counsel left a void. So thank you, sir, for your service.
And I'll second that. Thank you, Cameron, for your years of service here. We appreciate every effort made. Thank you. Next item of business is the Finance Committee report, and the chair recognizes Commissioner Betsy Benak.
Thank you. Finance Committee met this morning at 8:30, and one of the first things we did was go over the duties of the interim executive director. Did everyone get a copy of this? I'm not sure if everyone did get a copy of the duties. I didn't see it in the packet.
Yes.
Everyone did get a copy?
There's a copy in the packet.
It's
Correct.
Okay, I looked real quick, I couldn't see it. All right, so we went over that, and there was discussion about, what the salary increase for Michael should be during this. We had a discussion about, a really good discussion, I think, about what the duties would be, what the expectations is, and even moving forward, how this will be. And it's for a relatively short period of time, but we did agree at a 15% increase to take a vote, and so that was our suggestion. That was our motion that passed, that there be a 15% increase. Does that have to be ratified by the full board then?
The board should you should make a motion, or someone on the
I would like to make a motion that we approve a 15% increase for Michael as he serves as the interim executive director.
Been a motion, a second. Any discussion? Is there any objections to the motion? All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
The ayes have it. That, you wish to vote no?
Yeah, and that was a consistent vote.
Well,
So,
Do we need to clarify the retroactivity of that in the motion?
And that was, yeah, that was retroactive to June 25th, which was the pay period after we had voted at the last meeting to make him the executive director. So that's when the pay will be retroactive to. Any concerns? Okay, the other thing that we did was we had a presentation by PSTA, a presentation of where we are budget-wise right now and where we're moving forward. It was a financial and budget update by Deborah Leos, Kelly Kavanaugh with CLA, and Brad Miller. And it was a very, very well-received presentation. We're getting our financial act together with a lot of clarity and something that we all have worried many nights about. I said, I get plenty of things to worry about. I don't need this to worry about. So we definitely appreciate PSTA's efforts to look at the grants, look at what's being funded, where the funds can be utilized, and making sure moving forward that we have the funding that we're going to need to achieve the mission of TBARTA, the redesignated TBARTA, if you will. So I think Debbie's going to perhaps give that presentation here as well. Is that true? I'd like to come forward, Brad and Debbie.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the TBARTA board. I'm Brad Miller. I'm the CEO of PSTA, and we did give this presentation to the Finance Committee, so we'll do a quick abbreviated version of it. And Ms. Kavanaugh with CLA has left, which is probably good because we're not paying her then. Debbie's going to kind of walk through what she has really done a great job in working with the TBARTA staff and organizing the expenses and getting the sort of financial house in order. And then I'm going to finish off with a brief presentation on where I think a prequel to your meeting later this month, where we're going to present next year's budget to TBARTA.
Good morning again. There's been a lot that has gone on over the last couple months. Really, the last time the board met was in June, and since that time, I have spent a lot of time meeting with FDOT, with FTA, with Clifton Larson Allen, with staff, a lot of time with staff, as well as vendors such as Enterprise. And I'm very proud to say that the staff has worked hard to catch things up. In your package is the financials through the end of June. When we spoke in June, we were actually at December, so we've come a long way in the last month or so. That'll help us in going forward. The Finance Committee is going to be getting a more detailed update on what the finances are, because numbers do tell a story. So I'm very excited about that. We've got a couple things. There's a lot of work to be done, one of which is closing out old grants. And we've got some old FTA grants we're trying to close out. We're going to be working to take one of those grants to update your website, and that has to be done in short order because these grants will expire at the end of September. So we've got a lot of work there as well. There's one thing that, as Brad's going to talk about the budget, and as we've talked about here, of being good stewards of money. You have some great investors here. FDOT is your biggest investor. And as we look to the budget going forward, my task and my job is to make sure all that money is spent appropriately and that there's a clear roadmap for staff or anybody else coming in as to what expenses go to what grant. So the better we do a better job at that, the more money TBARTA will get. Because to me, it's like someone has invested in us and we have to report back on how we're doing. At the Finance Committee, for anybody who wants to come to those in the future, I would, we are going to be presenting the projects and programs that TBARTA has as information items so that the investors can see how we're progressing. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Brad. Oh, actually, I've got one more slide here. I apologize. TBARTA does have enough money, as I've gone through my reviews, to be able to sustain itself on what it is doing today without any issues. But what we have found is there's a lot of procedural inefficiencies that has been kept that from being as well as it should have been. For example, on the grants, one of our suggestions in going forward is we have a system, we outsource the payroll. That payroll can actually have departments set up for each grant so that when reports are run, you just have everything right at your fingertips at that point in time to do the drawdowns. And working in concert with CLA as to, they're going to be coming back with more suggestions. We've got quite a few we are implementing. They have looked to say, PSTA is working with TBARTA right now. They are recommending to go forward with that, to extend this out for, I'm not going to say an indeterminate amount of time, but once you've got your new executive director on board, we can take a look and allow that executive director to get ensconced in his or her position. And then we will look to bring on a grant accountant. Next step would be probably bringing in a higher level person, a CFO, someone who's worked with P3s and bonding. And then the fourth piece is, right now, QuickBooks is the system that is used. And that is not robust enough to really handle things as you go forward and grow. So the fourth piece will be looking at a new system for TBARTA. So now with that, I will turn it over to Brad.
So as Debbie has said, she's done a lot of work working with the TBARTA staff to sort of understand and try to get the sort of current house in order. We're not there yet, but we do believe we're, in a couple of weeks, we'll present to you more detail that the TBARTA's current operations can be funded with the grants that they already have in place. But given that we're a new organization, we're looking ahead to the future, what should the budget be? At least I believe, and I think all of you would believe, that the budget should support the mission of TBARTA. I mean, the budget should be developed based on achieving the goals of the organization. So these are sort of three basic goals. You can bring that up on the slide, on the screen. One, the legislature has tasked TBARTA specifically with implementing the regional transit plans and services. So that's clearly an objective that the budget should support. Number two, we have to keep operating the van pool. It's a very good service, and it's the way we achieve federal funding. So it's an important part of our financial picture. And then number three, there's this vision that TBARTA will step up and be a much stronger organization for the region, being the one voice or the conduit for how we present our transit plans to Tallahassee and Washington, D.C. as a Tampa Bay. So that is what we have started to do and what we will finish doing, presenting to you at the end of the month, as putting the budget together, or the forecast that I'm about to present to you, sort of in basic terms. The other thing is, of course, as Debbie said, to give the board and others a much more transparent understanding of what TBARTA is all about through its finances. Presenting a much cleaner and understandable budget with all these different grant sources and everything, being much more transparent to the board and to others, I think will help TBARTA get that solid foundation. So what PSTA has been doing is sort of two things over the last month. One is what Debbie just talked about on the left-hand side, making sure that all the bills get paid and making sure that the grants are spent appropriately, that revenues minus expenditures is balanced, that we have that. And we do believe we will get there very quickly, that the current operation can be funded. In addition, what we're now doing is on the right-hand side, what would be the future TBARTA? What is sort of the vision for where TBARTA might go? That all can't be funded by the current revenue sources. So, but that can be the basis for our legislative committee and the legislative ask that we go to Tallahassee this coming year to the legislature and ask for a recurring funding for TBARTA. That future expenses minus the revenues we have now is going to be a delta, and that number is what we put in our legislative agenda to take up there, rather than maybe what we've done in the past, which is sort of pull numbers out whatever might be appropriate. And I know the legislative session, I'm sure they will have their own opinions, and it goes through a sausage-making process at the end. But at least we have a foundation for, and I think that'll make us more successful, is if we can show how we came up to our number. So again, and this is, I'm making this part of the presentation and not Debbie, because she'll have much more detail in a couple of weeks. The current operation of TBARTA is about a $2 million operation for Michael, Sue, the Vanpool operation, but they haven't been doing important functions, as we all know, and now we have an agreement with PSTA for the financial picture. If you put that out over a whole year, it would be, I think it'll be less than $200,000, but roughly about $200,000 that we will bill to the grants. And then this board has had a lot of discussions about the marketing, that there really isn't any marketing of what TBARTA has been doing, and that's been kind of an issue that people don't exactly understand. Obviously, the website needs some immediate work, and we think that's an opportunity to build some of these existing grants. So the current operation of about $2.3 million a year can be funded from the existing sources that FDOT and the federal government provide. So we think we're basically solid right now. But the future, so we got the $2.3 million today. The future TBARTA needs to grow and do much more significant things. The board has discussed that in the future, this voice, the TBARTA needs to hire its own government affairs professionals, both at the state level and at the federal level. So contracted out, essentially lobbying firms at the state and federal level, about $150,000 a year. As we've talked, as TBARTA sort of takes on the role of managing these major capital projects and transit systems, there's going to be more financial, probably not PSTA funds, but contracted out, like you were talking about with the attorneys, maybe in the future, even P3 and other kind of financial aspects. Growing the staff, having a procurement expert. So I put in some money there for administrative. There really is no community outreach now, as we know. The chair of the finance committee, BNAC, said, well, people in Manatee County don't really know exactly, or there's been some questions on your commission. Having a community outreach component, marketing, and then I think most importantly, these projects that TBARTA is going to be the leader on. The idea is not that TBARTA will grow to a very large organization of HART or PSTA size or necessarily operate. Maybe they contract out. They really focus on being the oversight of contracted services. I think this has been the vision that at least we've talked with the state legislature about for a while, that they're the leader, but a lot of their work is farmed out. So, but having some project management or some contract management staff is probably something to consider. So you take that, I think that the legislative request to the state will be order of magnitude about $1.5 million of recurring funding for TBARTA per year. Now, some of those items, especially like lobbying services, will never be funded by the state. Don't worry, we're not going to ask for that, Secretary, or the feds. So there always is going to be needing a local commitment. And I'm pleased that TBARTA saw in its wisdom to ask the counties, and I guess the counties that are members of TBARTA, for an additional $100,000 to bring up the total amount to $300,000, which is what really we think is probably the level of local commitment that is needed moving forward. Finally, what I've been talking about is ongoing recurring revenues that TBARTA can count on to fund its core mission. But in addition, there's already been identified about $5 million of capital one-time funding that's in TBARTA's account right now, in addition to these funds. And Secretary Gwynn has talked about including, to advance the regional project, another $5 million. So very soon, there could be upwards of $10 million of funding to additional one-time sources of funding for TBARTA. One option, which I would not recommend, is to not ask the legislature for any additional funds, but just take the $10 million and say, well, we'll just draw that down until we hit zero to fund our ongoing operations. But that is, as you all know, not a good idea. You need to have recurring revenues to support your mission. And then what I would recommend is we take these funds that are sitting there and we actually advance the projects. Doing work like I have listed down below. NEPA analysis, kind of the TOD kind of work that I know Hillsborough County is advancing in their county, and I think FDOT is working on some projects in other areas too. Moving into preliminary design, so to actually move the projects forward for real. That is what I would recommend with the one-time funds that we've been able to identify. Those were mostly federal funds, and the $1 million that the legislature just approved last year. That those projects be dedicated mostly to advancing the projects and not funding ongoing operations as best we can. So with that, again, that's sort of a teaser to what you'll see in more detail with the numbers, not with the M's, but for real financial numbers in a couple of weeks. And as the chair, as Ms. Benak said, we had a really good discussion at the Finance Committee just earlier today.
Thank you. Any questions for Brad?
No questions. I would like to get a copy of the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Questions? Commissioner?
Thank you. So I can get this speaker mic right. Thank you, Mr.
Yep.
Miller, for the presentation. Great presentation. Second time I learned it, being at the committee earlier. And you'll have to forgive me because I'm the new guy trying to learn a ton, drinking from a fire hose, and it is delightful, don't get me wrong. But if you could go back to the slide with the mission, the TBARTA mission that I saw at the committee and then again here. And I guess my question is I have yet to see the TBARTA's mission statement that we currently have. My question is, are these recommendations for augmentating that statement, or is this, explain to me more about how we get that and how that is different from our current mission statement.
It's a good question. This list of 3 is not your exact mission statement. The TBARTA board has adopted a mission statement. Like I mentioned, number 1 on the list is essentially the legislature tasked TBARTA last year with number 1. And that is maintained. That's what the legislature did when it reconstituted the TBARTA board in 2017 and then verified by appropriating $1 million in this last legislative session to advance the regional transit plan that has been recommended. I'm sure that we can compare exactly what the TBARTA's current mission statement is, but I know that it has been changed to essentially speak to that the TBARTA board has acknowledged that that is their responsibility to implement the regional transit plan. And this is sort of a more financial kind of fit with the finance plan summary of that.
Okay. All right. Thank you. If your direction determines your destination, it's important that we're all in agreement as to what we're trying to do, and then we can decide how we get there and the funding and things like that. Because when you get the cross-directional impulses, it's hard to get any momentum whatsoever in any organization. And so I applaud those recommendations. Thank you.
Michael, is your comment?
I think that's an excellent point, Commissioner Mitten, and thank you, Brad and Debbie, and to your staffs as well for putting together this excellent presentation. But just to clarify a little bit, the board did hold 2 workshops last year, the first in October and the second in December, to clarify what the purpose, vision, and goals of TBARTA moving forward as a new agency are. So if we could see that slide again, very briefly. Okay, so these three things are very consistent with what the guiding principles, goals, vision, and purpose that have been set for TBARTA are. I believe I had provided you a copy of that document. So I won't go through actually how those things relate to it now, but just generally, these are consistent with the mission of TBARTA.
Betsy?
Yeah, and I really appreciate that question. It's certainly the question you as a new member should absolutely ask as you sit on this board, what is our mission? And it's one that we have struggled with in the past because of the limited funding. You know, we know what we want to do, but if you looked at how transit has been approached in this region, hasn't had a whole lot of success in the last few years. So we got to focus on having a mission and funding that mission and not deviate from that. And that's something that I think, after serving on this board for 6 years and seeing a lot of back and forth, I'm hoping that we can do that. I'm hoping we can have a mission, focus on it, get the funding, and move it forward. But it isn't easy, so I say those words. I do have a question about advancing the regional transit plan, which I do think is absolutely our mission. But I guess because I've been trained so through the MPO about buckets of funding and what it can be spent on, you know, doing a NEPA analysis with funding that is already in place. And we talked a little bit about this morning, talking about expanding the pool that we have in our federal transit plan, which I understand. But I just would love to hear from DOT. Do they think that this all makes sense? If we're going to pick some of these things to focus on and we've got some money and we're going to focus on, I want to make sure it's doable.
Yeah, and I probably, before I would get into details of every little piece of the money, I'd have to go back and talk to my staff, because you're right, there are some things that have handcuffs on them. I'd also, just as I was thinking about the legislative asks, whatever they are, I think last year we were a little bit prescriptive in what we had in there, and it handcuffed us a little bit. So this time, maybe just having it be a little less, you know, as much as possible to get it so that you can spend it on things that you may want to, that aren't covered by the language we had last year. The $5 million that we have is district money. We can use that for, it's very flexible. And so I can speak to that. That's in this year's program. We have it ready. I mean, it's available now, and it's available through June. If we needed to, we could roll it into the next year. But that money is district allocated money, so we have a lot of flexibility with that. I'm not so sure, I didn't sit in on the finance meeting to know what those other funds that you're finding that are available, federal money, what their what those restrictions are, but
Yeah.
But for the state money that we have available, it's very flexible.
Well, and this list of 4 sort of illustrative type tasks that will be needed to advance the regional transit plan, all those could be funded by the federal funds that TBARTA has access to now.
Cool.
We just need to set it up that way.
Yes, Kathleen. Push yours on.
There you go.
Okay.
Yep.
I made a couple points in the Finance Committee meeting. I'm not going to repeat those entirely, except I do want to once again say PTSA should get an award for their efforts that they've done in recalibrating TBARTA's finances. I mean, you can't underestimate that. Money is the most responsible thing that taxpayers hold us accountable for, and we should be accountable for that, and we should be transparent in the money and how it's allocated. So I really want to say thank you. I want to put a little perspective on this. You're going to have a transition year in Tallahassee. We got $1 million last year, which was a big lift, and we have to validate that. We have zero marketing anywhere about what our money is and how we're doing and what our purpose is. So that Brad has just outlined a pathway. It's not perfect. And I agree with about 95% of it, is something that I hope later in August we can agree to, sign on to, and start talking about. Because if we're not talking to these legislators by the 1st of October, we're not going to be anywhere next year. I mean, I hate to say this, and I think realistically getting 1 million recurring with the leadership transitions and, you know, all the stuff that I anticipate will happen in the next 6 months up there, I think that that's a viable ask. You know, we can quibble about how it's allocated and where it gets spent, and that's all gonna come out in the wash. But I really think it's important that we start telling a story about who we are and what we are. And I know we've been in the past a big quibble quabble, and I think our finances and how we treated money, or how money was not accountable, or how money wasn't known where the pots were, or whatever was the fault, we need to step forward and say, we got $1 million, this is our mission, and this is our plan. And the last thing I'd say is, please don't spend one-time money on recurring issues. That's the one lesson I learned in Tallahassee, and it is the biggest lesson that I take everywhere I go when I was on the State Board of Education. Do not spend one-time money on recurring issues. Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
Mr. Long.
I would like to speak again to the issue that Commissioner Shanahan has referenced many times in our Finance Committee and board meetings about our inability to use our website and social media and the digital marketing that is so prevalent in our world today. And I think it's important to let you know that delving into these finances the way we have, I've taken a special interest in it this year, especially because I'm chair of PSTA and have to look out for them too. The communications department at PSTA is very solid and robust in terms of how we push out our projects and things that we're doing. And every Friday we get a little video of some new really techie thing that Brad and his group are working on. And to that point, they are, please correct me if I'm wrong, team, working with FKQ, who did our rebranding of our own website here at PSTA to ensure that we have real professionals working on that website that can bring it up, bring it current, and put all the information that we're doing right now, especially in an effort to complete the public engagement piece of what we're supposed to be doing with the 41-mile transit feasibility plan. I think that's going to give us a big boost in terms of speaking to our community and the stakeholders in our region. And I couldn't be more excited about that. And I'm not very techie, but I certainly pay attention to what comes across my Twitter and I don't know how to use all that stuff very well, but I look at it all the time, Facebook and, you know, things like that. So stay tuned, because they're just working like little minions on this all the time. Michael and Susan, and they've just made huge progress. It's been a huge learning curve for them. Wouldn't you agree? Yeah, good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Commissioner. And to that point, too, I'd like to ask, if that vendor that the Commissioner referenced, your public relations vendor and web vendor, are they able to add on? Per our contract with you, can we augment services through them to directly revamp our website and make it a little more user-friendly and interactive and far-reaching?
Yeah, I mean, we did look at that. We looked at the option of TBARTA doing its own procurement and hiring its own firm. There are some funds, as Debbie mentioned, that are lapsing very quickly. And PSTA's contract with our vendor that we did procure does allow for us to extend it to TBARTA. They did do the work on our website. TBARTA's website is a lot different animal than PSTA's, but they certainly have that capability, and I think they'll do a good job, and they can do a good job quickly, too.
Is there a recommendation needed? 'Cause I thought you said the funds were expiring in September, and my memory from our previous contracts was that we can't actually pay for fees until the fees are incurred. At least I'm commingling that with another discussion about our executive director search, but I'm just wondering, like, do we need to go ahead and do that now so they have 6 weeks to work on our website and bill us some fees for those things?
Yeah, that's what
Then
we're
moved.
trying to do.
Second.
It's noted in our interlocal agreement with PSTA that they have the capability to do that as well, just FYI.
Okay, perfect. And I just didn't know if we needed a TBARTA vote to direct that, because our website could use some major, yeah, we definitely don't want to let those funds lapse without using them, because it could use some major love. And I know it's something you're passionate about as well, Michael.
Sounds to me to be a germane and appropriate motion, so I would entertain that. Melanie, have you made the motion?
I made the motion, I thought I did.
Motion and a second. Discussion? Mr. Executive Director, would you like to comment?
Yes, if you could. Thank you. I'll just add that we have engaged FKQ already through the assistance of PSTA. We are working on technically what are 2 projects simultaneously, one of which directly relates to the federal funds that we have to expend by September of this year. So that will be the first part of what we work on with them. That amount is actually below the threshold through which the board needs to provide approval. The second part is an actual complete overhaul of the website. If you've been to the TBARTA website over the past year, no explanation is needed that an overhaul is certainly needed there. So we will be using state funds for that, and we plan to piggyback on the contract that PSTA currently has with them, so there will be no need for an RFP or other quotes. FKQ is more than qualified, and they do excellent work, so we're excited to move this effort forward.
Well, point of clarification I have, does that mean that Melanie's motion is redundant now that we're moving forward, or is that an appropriate motion?
Yeah, I mean, technically, the motion would be redundant in that we do not need any kind of board motion to move this effort forward.
But it is being moved forward.
It's being moved forward already.
I would draw my motion then.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions?
One question.
Oh, yeah, Mike.
So for I guess I'll direct this to you, Brun. In addition to sort of the web development services that FKQ provides, they also provide social media strategy development. So to the extent that we're prioritizing the need to push a message out, a message is going to be changing over time. Is that something they provide as a suite of services, or how does the board intend to develop its strategy with respect to that? So the first question's for you. I think the second question is more of a discussion point.
Well, as Michael said, right now we have specifically tasked this FKQ advertising firm with focused on the website. I'm sure they would gladly give us a proposal to focus on other things like social media, which is very important. Long term, we're suggesting that TBARTA have some of that capabilities brought in-house to save money versus an outside firm, but we can certainly look at that. These federal funds that we're really focused on right now, so we don't lose them, I think are really need to be focused on the website. Yeah.
Thank you. Other questions? Thanks so much, and again, thanks to PSTA for all the great work you're doing. That concludes the Finance Committee reports. Melanie, do you have any updates or Policy Committee?
My only question was, is there anything that you want the Policy Committee to meet about prior to the next board meeting, such as the Hyperloop Transportation Technologies presentation that was considered by the CCC, or anything else?
Yeah, I think the Hyperloop presentation, we have had discussions about having a board presentation on that, so I think that should be vetted through the Policy Committee.
And is there anything else about what you'd like us to meet before the next meeting?
I think the real exigent meeting needs to be with your subcommittee, the legislative subcommittee, and I think there was an issue in probably scheduling that due to conflicts this week. But I think with all due haste that we all need to get that legislative committee moving, because that's going to be the really pressing issue. Commissioner Long.
Yes, Could you pass that little packet
Now,
down?
you need to hit your button now.
Oh, yes, sorry, I got overzealous. If you could
Touche.
pass that, take, Jim, please, take one copy and give the rest to Melanie, because for your, whenever you decide to call the legislative commit, those, I don't know if there was enough for everyone, but Doyle brought in enough for the legislative committee members so that they can see what the legislative timeline is, subject, of course, to change because the dates for session are kind of an educated guess given where we are right now, but then when the new legislature convenes an organizational session after Election Day, then we'll update those dates for knowing when we have to do what to who.
Yeah, and for the record, we did have, as you know, a meeting scheduled for August 1st. It was unable to meet due to a lack of quorum, but we have talked with staff already about making sure that there is a subcommittee meeting as well as a policy committee meeting scheduled before the 24th. So we'll get those done immediately.
Thank you.
I now recognize the interim director for his executive report.
So actually, we have a presentation first for our Title VI program. This is actually a requirement of FTA, both to accept funds as a subrecipient and as a direct recipient, which you all know we're working with PSTA on currently. So I'm going to, Chair, with your permission, recognize Hugh Pasco with Pasco Planning Services, LLC, on a very brief presentation on what we've put together for that Title VI program, which, as a part of FTA recommendations, it should be a board-approved program to move forward.
Okay, thank you, Michael. I think very brief, it's the operative board here. Get the presentation up.
Still have quorum? Okay. Okay.
We are good. We do have to have action on this today, if we could, please. Again, members of the board, Hugh Pasco, Pasco Planning Services. Title VI is one of the things that obviously you do not want to encounter in a bad way. Pardon?
Go ahead.
Very typical with anything that flows down from the federal government. It obviously is a very important program. We want to really thank, though, the assistance of DOT and Ford Pinellas in helping us throw together a program that we really feel works. Obviously, Title VI is something you really want to do more on the front end. You don't want to have problems coming in on the back end of the program, because at that point you really have to go through a very detailed process to try to really keep you in conformance with federal law. Again, something comes out of, I can forward here, Title VI coming out of the Federal Civil Rights Act of 1964. Need to read the words in there. No person in the United States shall, on the ground of race, color, or national origin, excluded from the participation and be denied the benefits of or subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. And really, the main thing about that, TBARTA does, given the band pool program, other activities, does receive federal funding. So again, very important again, that all the provisions of that law, all the rules that come under that law are really provided for, really met in the best possible way. And again, like I said, it's something that needs to be really front end of the program. TBARTA, again, the regional provider of commuter assistance programs. It's that TBARTA is a transit, paratransit, in this case, provider, and would use federal funds to subsidize the band pool program. That, as the board has been pointed out several times, is a very large, very important program. You know, we have 725 daily weekday trips, 110 vans operating 25 miles per trip. That is a very substantial system, and obviously, given the nature of the region, the diversity of the region, would impact several different populations. We'll get into that a little bit more. The good thing about that in the program is that we do have things that really accommodate people, again, that do have mobility problems. The emergency ride home to help band poolers getting home from work. In the event, again, of illness or family problems, having to work late. Again, this makes the program very accessible, very usable people that do have mobility problems. They do have adaptive driving devices, and really, obviously, one part of the entire federal program is the Americans with Disabilities Act, and we do accommodate ADA with Enterprise, the contracting entity, and devices, procedures are available under that program to accommodate people with ADA challenges. I'm not going to go through every objective, but really want the board to know that we do have definite objectives that we are going to be going back and looking at the whole way through the program. Obviously, a lot of them are common sense. We kind of read about that, obviously, but it's, again, providing a level of quality of transit service to all populations. And again, given the nature of the region, and that is one of the different things about TBARTA, very good, local transit properties deal with Title VI at a very detailed level. The good thing about our program, we can draw upon the regional partners that we have, and that is a very important part of the overall TBARTA program. We have people that we can lean upon, that we can use to obviously help TBARTA in throwing together different elements of the program that really can help the affected populations. But again, the main thing we want to do, I'll point the one out, we really want to prevent the denial of any kind of service for people that need that. It's something that we really have to deal with all the time. If there is a change in service, if there is something that would affect a different population, we have to really know that. We have to go out to that group. We have to bring that information back to the board. So one of the key words of Title VI is transparency in the process. And it's also making sure that it really impacts the decision-making process on the part of the board. If we don't get it to you, you don't have the capability of making a decision that takes all those different facets into consideration. There are a lot of things in federal law that say you have to make, again, this very transparent. We have to actually post notices. Michael, in one of his other roles, is the Title VI officer for TBARTA. He would be really kind of the front line in there in dealing with people that do have a complaint. But the main thing, again, we want to make sure we do not have a complaint. So again, if there is one, though, we want to make sure that the process is very clearly laid out, that they can come in, they can know exactly how they can make complaints, and try to keep that process moving as smooth as possible. Again, the complaint procedure, we have another major facet of the program, public involvement. We've talked a lot about that with TBARTA. Again, we draw very much upon our regional partners to really get the word out there. Not only trying to do really a one-dimensional program, where we try to take stuff in, but engaging back into the community to try to work with the different groups directly to make sure we're not having problems. A language assistance plan is, again, a very important part of the overall process. That deals with people that have limited English proficiency. We do have Spanish-speaking staff on with TBARTA too. We can do informal translation. We would also have access to process that give formal translation services. Obviously, the Tampa Bay area, we have very much a Spanish-speaking population here. There are other pockets too. But again, too, that is predominantly the emphasis area we would have within the Tampa Bay area. Again, I talked about that already. We do have a very detailed procedure. If somebody has a problem, to be able to go in and file a complaint. They can also be filed through federal and state entities, and these need to be verbal and non-written complaints, and I want to point that out. They would be resolved informally by TBARTA. We would work with DOT very much. They are an expert in doing that if there are further actions that need to be taken to remediate a problem. Really kind of goes through a very quick overview of the Title VI process, but again, this is like an iceberg. You're seeing really the tip of it here, but there is a lot of process that underlies the entire process and making sure that the populations are fully included in your process. If there are any questions, I'll try to answer those.
Any questions?
Move approval.
Commissioner Kemp.
I don't have a question so much as a comment. These programs, these Title VI programs, also environmental justice programs relate to programs that receive federal dollars. And as you've stated, require minority and other disadvantaged communities involved in transportation planning and efforts to ensure that the planning doesn't deny benefits nor overburden Title VI communities. We in Hillsborough County I think are pretty much ground zero in a way that is maybe not as obvious to this group and to other counties, because I think that they have less experience in that area because of the way the populations are. MPOs have obligations to assist, engage, and hear from the Title VI communities. The study that TBARTA has ongoing related to the MPO structure and considering the merger of Hillsborough, Pasco, and Pinellas County just very fails to adequately address Title VI concerns. And I think it's really important that that is really noted and that we look at that, what is going on there. This issue popped out to me when I looked back at the study and the lack of comparison of the demographics of the 3 counties. And that is this slide that was put in as part of the report as exists now. According to the Office of Economic Research, the Florida Office of Economic Research, Hillsborough is slightly more diverse than the state of Florida as a whole. Hillsborough County has 25% Hispanic or Latino, 16% Black, it's 71% white. There's also the second largest Arabic population in the nation in Hillsborough County, outside of Detroit. And that isn't even something that is typically accounted for. Pasco and Pinellas are markedly less diverse than the state as a whole. Pasco is 12% Hispanic or Latino, 4.5% Black, it's 83% white. Pinellas, 8% Hispanic or Latino, 10% Black, and 82% white. So Hillsborough is 71% white. Again, the Arabic population isn't accounted for. Pasco, 88%, Pinellas, 82%. These differences matter, and they need to be addressed in the MPO study. They haven't been at this time. And if you see this page, they did a really, rather than comparing Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Pasco to each other, they combined the 3 and compared compared the 3 counties to all Florida counties, and they really mask the difference that Hillsborough has. So understanding the impacts Title VI can have for us here and with regards to these MPO studies, because I fully expect that in Hillsborough County there will be Title VI challenges as we move forward to plans if these differences aren't acknowledged and if we don't start to deal with them. So I'd like to move that the MPO regional coordination structure research and best practices for the Tampa Bay region be required to make and report a comparison between the demographics of Hillsborough, Pinellas, and Pasco counties and address how a merger would impact these Title VI communities. I think it's really important that we do that.
Commissioner, thank you for those comments. I understand what you're saying and understand the impact, and it's a very salient issue. I don't know that that is specifically germane to what we're doing here today, that motion.
But it is the
clarify?
MPO study that we have, and so I think it's really important that it's a time when we're talking about the Title VI, I think, to entertain and think about how we move forward, since this is a study that is
I think we have a
ours.
specific staff recommendation regarding our Title VI compliance today, and you're raising an issue that concerns the MPO study, which I don't necessarily disagree with you with. I think you're well taken. I'm just questioning the germanity of the motion in the context of this agenda item, but I'm happy to reserve that to another time if you want to make that motion when we have a briefing on the MPO study, which I think would be appropriate if you're acceptable to that.
I am, but I hope that we do deal with this. And I feel, as honestly, that it is germane to this. We could pass this through, but an appropriate time to look at this. It's a pretty simple motion to move forward on. But we can move forward on the general motion.
Yeah.
And we can set it aside and, relook at this and some of the other information in MPO study, but since we are responsible for the MPO study.
Perhaps a motion to reconsider your motion to the next meeting would be in order.
Yeah.
If someone would make that.
So moved. I'll move her motion.
And I'll second it, and I'd also like to follow up, Mr. Chair, that I agree with Commissioner Kemp, and our Forward Pinellas MPO board has not been briefed on the summary study either. So I think once we do, we'll probably all think that that's something that needs.
I completely agree, and I think this deserves an actual presentation time at a more appropriate time. So there's been a motion and a second to reconsider to the next meeting, and any discussion on that?
But not to wait,
No,
we have to take action.
We are now, we're just on Commissioner.
Okay, good.
Motion to set for another time.
Yes.
Can I be clarified exactly what the motion is that we're voting on right now? I'm not sure I
The motion
understand.
is to defer Commissioner Kemp's consideration of Commissioner Kemp's motion to a more definite time, which would be next meeting.
So we're
And
actually.
the motion includes, though, that we want to see the presentation on the MPO study.
Correct.
We're going to have a presentation on the MPO study at the next meeting.
Correct.
Yes.
That I can vote on.
Yes.
Yep.
A motion, a second, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Commissioner Kemp. I do believe if we don't have any questions, we do need a Title VI motion germane to that, and I would ask staff to specifically make the motion that we need to consider to be in compliance with Title VI.
Yes, thank you very much. So the Title VI plan, we did post it on the website for comment. We also ran it by staff at PSTA, as well as Ford Pinellas, who we've been working extensively with on making sure that all of the requirements for this plan are met. As Hugh said, basically this just outlines the process for reaching out to sensitive populations, including those that fall under APA, and sets out the process to receive and address complaints. So it's the staff recommendation that we approve the plan to submit to FTA.
So moved.
Second.
Been a motion, a second, any discussion? All those in favor of the motion signify by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thanks. Any further discussion in your executive director's report, Michael?
Yeah, just a couple of things. Let me just start off by saying how happy I am to be up here with you all serving in the interim role. It's a bit of a different perspective up here than it is out there sitting beside Susan, where I've been for the past 3 years. So just a couple of things I'd like to highlight that we've accomplished over the past month. As you know, we held the Tampa Bay Transit Forum at the Tampa International Airport Marriott on July 20th. By all means, I think it was a very successful event. We had 348 people signed in attendance, including Commissioners Long and Seal, who were right there in the front row. Members of our Bay Area Legislative Delegation were also there, including Senator Galvano, Daryl Rousson, and several representatives as well, including Larry Ahern and Janet Cruz, and of course members of the general public and media. We covered a lot of ground in this event, and there is quite a detailed summary of it, a post-event summary in your packets. In a nutshell, the overall message, I think, of the event was clear, that this is our time here in Tampa Bay. It's also TBARTA's time to shine, according to Senator Galvano's comments. Also, BRT, done right, which is what we're moving forward with now, will be the key first piece in developing a robust transit system that will relieve congestion, attract new jobs, and of course attract and keep talent in our region. There is a survey for the plan that is live until August 15th. You can participate in that, and I would strongly encourage you to ask others to participate in it as well, because we could certainly use the feedback on the plan. That website is tbregionaltransit.com/survey/. Also a big thank you to our sponsors that were there. We had Tampa International Airport, several chambers of commerce. All in all, we had about $15,000 worth of sponsorships, which was more than able to cover the costs of the event. Quickly on the van pool program, you heard in the Title VI update and plan that we had 110 vans last year. Enterprises presentation last month, there was 120, and I'm happy to announce that we've added 5 more vans in just the past month alone. So the program is having a big impact and the region is experiencing significant growth. Our local funding, we have received and approved amount from Hillsborough County in the amount of $120,970. We are working with the other counties as well on their requests. Last thing, a couple last things I'll highlight. We are working with PSTA as well on developing a draft RFP for the Regional Transit Development Plan. We expect to bring that draft to you at the next meeting for your approval before we release it out into the public for bids. Last thing, and this adds on to Commissioner Kemp's comments earlier regarding the MPO study. We are conducting a major workshop on August 27th at St. Pete Collaborative Labs at 10 a.m. That's going to go over all of the consultant research that's been done to date and distilling that down into what we're calling portable concepts for the MPOs to consider in improving our regional coordination results. So it's very important that we have participation and we get feedback on that because it will play a major role in determining what the recommendations of that study are. So we're keeping RSVPs open until August 13th, and so far we have about 100 in attendance. There is limited space. Most of the attendants so far have been elected officials as well as members of the private sector as well. So we've got about 50 spots left. So if you're interested in attending, I would encourage you to RSVP sooner rather than later. And I can share that link with everyone as well. And that concludes my report.
Thank you, Michael. Any questions for Michael? Commissioner Kemp.
Thank you. Just one question. On your survey that you do, is there an opportunity on there at any place for people to just make any comments that they want to?
I understand that if you're referring to the RFTP survey, that there should be a section close to the end for general comments.
Okay, thank you.
Correct.
One quick
Cliff?
When I visited with Michael, I told him that I had missed the opportunity to go to the behind-the-scenes look at the airport, new people mover system and other things, and I regretted not being able to make that trip. I mentioned to him he might bring to the board's attention maybe we could get a tour scheduled for our board to look at the things they've implemented there to move people in transit systems at the airport. The last one we had there was very informative and quite beneficial, and I didn't know if any of the board members had the same interest.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
We can move that forward.
Betsy.
Yeah, I can't miss this opportunity since we have the District 1 Secretary for FDOT, LK here, which is always good to see. Just ask about whether or not there's been any more progress on looking at expanding the van pool both ways into Manatee County.
Mr. Chair, if I may.
Please.
We are definitely looking into that. We have a current process where we are hiring a new commuter services consultant. Once that is in place, then we'll get into conversations.
Okay. Always have to bring it up to make sure we're making progress.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Other questions? One comment I have for both secretaries as well, I have had some discussions along with some of the stakeholders about encouraging as much as practical to do managed lanes or do dedicated lanes for transit as much as opposed to managed lanes. And it's been an ongoing discussion with Senator Galvano, incoming Speaker Sprowls, and others. Didn't know the current position of the central office on that, Secretary Gwynn, and I know it's been an ongoing dialogue that we want to continue to have with you as things move along. So if you could maybe just update us a little bit on the status of that. And I know it's in flux in terms of the politics.
Right. There's been a lot of discussion, and I think one thing to bring this all back to is the original objective of the Catalyst project and the study and the task that was given to Jacobs was to identify a project that would be a candidate to get federal funds. The challenge we ran into when we did our first set of projects was with the ridership that we can estimate through the process that they require us to follow. You can't cheat on it. You come up with a number. And the cost per rider, we were very limited in what options were available to us. And that's kind of one of the main reasons that we were kind of trying to leverage highway funding on the interstate system. When we get into the dedicated lanes, especially within the express lane areas, I'm afraid that's going to drive the cost up to the point where federal funding won't be an option for us. We're asking our consultants to take a closer look at that to figure out what the cost would be. My personal opinion, express lanes can serve a bus if it's operated appropriately. It's shown that in South Florida. There's just a lot of things we have to look at, because once we start driving the cost up, it becomes, then we would be looking for more local and state funds and not necessarily be able to get the federal funds. So there's also some operational concerns we have about a dedicated lane within the express lanes, just based on operation speeds and how that would work. But that's an ongoing discussion that we're having. As we enter into the PD&E phase, which is the $5 million that we have set up for the next stage, that'll be looked in more detail. But I think we got to be careful not to just fall into a trap of saying that we need dedicated lane everywhere, or we could run into a real cost issue, because that has not been built into the plan to date.
No, we were aware of those multitude of legal concerns and certain concerns that certainly with the FTA. There had been discussion and somewhat of a political impetus to say, hey, the dedicated lanes make sense though. So thanks for keeping us apprised of what's going on at DOT, because I think it's something that's important to all of us. And I think overall, if this community in this area wants to have a really viable long-term transit program, whatever mode is chosen in potentially intermodal systems, you need to really move as far as we can towards a dedicated right-of-ways for those systems, which whether it be BRT, rail, whatever. And but thanks for keeping us apprised on that. Commissioner Kim.
Thank you. Thanks for raising that issue and getting the clarification. I really appreciate the clarification. Have looked at this for a long time. We're talking about 11 buses. If every bus was full, it would be 60 people on each bus. And the entire system over an hour and a half, as we say, I can't see how it could ever do that, but anyway, that there would be 660 people on those buses at any given hour, because they're talking about, well, we were talking about half hourly, but even if we did 15 minutes, it would only be 240 people an hour that could be or those lanes, or any given lane. And 1,600 cars, as I understand, move an hour on a lane, and the passengers that they would have. So I can't see how it could possibly make economic sense for any of our taxpayer dollars to be used for a dedicated lane that would carry so many fewer people. I've also seen that there's not been dedicated lanes in major cities all over the country, New York, with much higher populations and abilities to fill the lanes with transit. So I just never could see how that could in any way be done.
And I think, Scott, you're in here. I think the ridership estimates were higher than 240, weren't they? I don't know the exact number. We probably at some point get another presentation to update us on a lot of that. The shoulder can be considered a dedicated right-of-way in some places. And so, for instance, on I-275 north of I-4, we could create a shoulder and call it a dedicated lane for transit.
Right.
In other areas, such as down in the Howard Franklin Bridge, in the Gateway area, in other places where we would have managed lanes, our concern would be running a bus in a shoulder next to 65-mile-an-hour traffic, both going and in the shoulder not being available, when really the bus could work on the managed lane. There's always opportunities that could be looked at for shoulder running in, if there was ever a situation where there was congestion in the express lanes. But we wouldn't want that to be the opening salvo of our express lanes, is to have a bus lane next to it that also could quickly be looked at from a public perception of, you have one vehicle every 10 to 15 minutes going in it, the pressure comes, why can't we all use it? There's just a lot of things we need to think about, and that'll be flushed out in the PD&E study.
Right, that's what I was going to say, that I think that a lot of this discussion can be deferred. I just wanted an update on kind of the theoretical underpinnings with the numbers and the, you know, when the PD&E can be flushed out more appropriately at the correct time as the input and process moves along. Thanks. Any other questions for Michael? Okay, none being heard, is there any old or new business to come before the board? None being heard, I'll accept a motion to adjourn.
Move to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor? Aye. Adjourn.
I think it's more than 240, isn't it?
Well, no, they ran every 15 minutes. They would carry every 15 minutes.
That happened in August of a year ago. I remain as chair.
That's the match right now.
And I think
No, sir.
August
Blew the whole way down.
I don't know what they really are.
Blew all the way.
That was good.
As I
I want to talk about discussion
We're totally full and utilized. 11 buses.
Yeah, are you hiring